This is Wix Studio.
Hello and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. I am your host, Alison, and this is my first ever attempt at doing a live stream all on my lonesome. And already I'm dealing with some technical difficulties because this scene is not switching. Oh, yep, it did. Okay, great. All right. So let me do the things. If you would like to send me a message at any time throughout the show, then please do so at feedthebadger.com. That is feedthebadger.com. Honey Badger Radio gets the full benefit of whatever funds you send, and you get the full benefit of sending your comment not through YouTube's comment enhancement system. All right. So, and also if you'd like to support the show, you do so at feedthebadger.com/support. This was a request by, I believe, somebody in our patron Discord sent it through. If you're interested in joining us there, it's at badgernation.online. So this request was about, actually last week, or was it last week? Or maybe it was this week. I talked about Peter Galloway, but he was being interviewed by, I believe, the BBC. And now he's doing the rounds with the MSNBC. I think he's trying to explain to the Democratic Party that how to bring young men back into the fold, because this is the first time ever, well, recently, last 5 years, that young men have voted more conservative. Usually they can be relied upon to vote more in line with progressive causes, shall we say, but that has ended about 5 years ago. And we're seeing an increasing divide between men and women in terms of their political allegiance. And the Democratic Party has realized it's entirely possible that they lost the 2024 election because, well, their messaging towards young men is rather appalling, shall we say. So we're gonna look into this. We've already had a little bit of a taste of Scott Galloway in a previous live stream where I'm pretty sure that I skewered him. And I also think I mentioned that neither party really understands the issue, which is that we are in a war against masculinity, and until we decide to stop that, we're going to increasingly lose the benefit of men and manhood in our societies. And I don't think, neither party really looks at it like that. Looks at it purely in terms of recognizing and understanding the situation for men. There's no party that represents that perspective. Only we represent that perspective, right? And we have for almost 15 years. All right, so just tell me, guys, if there's anything going on, like with the sound, if it's good. No, we're not going to be doing horizontal today because, unfortunately, my voles, that is the Canadian internet voles, they're the little rodents responsible for carrying the packets from rural Canada to the nearest internet hub. They are not going to carry both the vertical and the horizontal. So you just get me on the horizontal or the vertical today, and we'll see how that goes. But yes, all right, let's get right into it.
Scott, you've said so many interesting and provocative things. I don't have enough time to dive into all of them, so you're going to have to promise to come back. But I do want to read this. This is something you said about wealth in America. The bottom line is rights and democracy have become purely a function of how wealthy you are in America. The wealthiest 1% are protected by the law but not bound by it, and the bottom 99% are bound by the law but not protected by it. Explain that.
As you know, I'm probably going to have to pause it about every 20 seconds or we will get hit by a copyright strike and that will be the end of a response stream. I just, well, I mean, it depends on how they answer this. If he appeals to the collusion between government and corporations, he might have a point. And, regulatory capture, but we'll see what he has to say.
I would argue, Nicole, that we could live in deepest, reddest Mississippi, and if someone in our life became pregnant, we could handle it. If somebody gets angry at me for free speech or saying negative things, I can lawyer up. If things get really bad and they start rounding up Jews.
Presumably because you're part of the 1%. Okay, all right. That's good to know that you are. So you're not really speaking out of actual experience of dealing with, deep pockets legally.
As they did in the 30s. And by the way, I don't think there's that much difference between us and Germany in the 20s and 30s if you really look at what's going on here.
Okay, I think I know where this is going. There's not much difference between the U.S. now and Germany in the 20s and 30s. Well, the U.S. isn't paying ruinous war reparations, and they haven't just come out of a world war in which that was placed on them. The U.S. Isn't currently. Economic times are tough, but it's not exactly tough like Germany in the Weimar Germany. It's not quite there. And then the other thing is that the mass media in our culture doesn't really have their scapegoat. I guess you could say, at least on the college campuses, they do have sort of a Jewish scapegoat. They rename it Zionist. But the mainstream media, I don't think is... Because part of the issue with Nazi Germany, we probably just got demonetized, was that it was a mass media produced hysteria. The mass media was very much culpable in what happened. And I can't see the establishment media pursuing that narrative against the targets that were pursued in that time in Germany. I don't think that they're going to go for that. In fact, I think that what they're going to do is they will continue to apply the term Nazi in order to ostracize and destroy people they find inconvenient to whatever narrative is financially.
I have the money to peace out.
All right, but I really doubt that it's quite the same. The thing is that people think they get really narrowly focused on the particular targets of the mass media hysteria of that time, and they don't realize that we'll just evolve our targets. Like, we'll change them. And a while back I did a video on the media targeting a group of hippies from the Church of Weed, some anarchists, free speech anarchists, and an Indian American, Congress or senatorial candidate. And they sent 100,000, like a gigantic mob, to the gazebo where these 12 people were setting up their free speech and Church of Weed signs because they had called them Nazis. And then I showed video from inside the gazebo, and the mainstream media never showed any kind of media from inside the gazebo because then people would have seen what the hell. But they stirred up that kind of fervor using that term. So our black speech now has almost become like a 180, and the media uses these terms to point the finger without any oversight at whoever they don't like. And again, this is exactly the same thing as in that sense, he's right, but I don't think he would come to the same conclusions that I am, that the targets have changed, they've shifted, and we aren't even recognizing that. So, but, let's hear what he has to say.
To Milan or Dubai, there's an emerging transnational oligarchy where you essentially have your own schools, you have your own defense, you have your own health care, you have your own laws, and the shameful or the disappointing.
All right, so you represent that category of people, as you just said, because you're able to bounce because you have the money, and presumably you also have the money to deal with the legal system. So what is your ultimate conclusion here? Like, you're saying, well, I'm part of a category of people that's just above the law. Okay. All right, and they exist. There's a category of people above the law. Yeah, welcome to human history. There has always been a category of people above the law. In some cases, we don't even have a system that is ruled by law. We have a system of a rule of law. We have a system of rule by law. So the people who are above the law use the law to rule everyone else. And I guess he's starting to talk about that being the system that we're in. Let's hear some more.
The pointing thing about that is that it reduces the vested interest in the success and the protection of what is America amongst the most powerful. The reality is your rights are...
So it protects what is America among the most powerful. Now, I don't think he's necessarily wrong. I just wonder who he considers the most powerful and who he's ultimately going to point the finger at.
Are entirely correlated now to your wealth. And there's a bit of a silent conspiracy between the very wealthy and the Trump administration, who clutch their pearls at how terrible what is going on is, but at the same time upload their taxes to ChatGPT, as I have done, and found out they're about to become much wealthier with the Trump tax cuts. You know, the biggest shame about all...
Yeah, you know, it does sort of feel like that. It sort of feels like the people on top are always advocating for their own interests. For example, all of the corporate bureaucrats who were concerned about losing their jobs when those, Doge went in and tried to analyze what they were actually doing and if they were providing any actual benefit to anyone but themselves. I mean, it does feel like, when you get to a certain point up there, everything is just about how to use people to make money. But that's, what's the alternative? That communists were no different.
All of this, or one of the biggest shames about all of this, is that if the Trump administration brought the same competence and elegance to governing as they bring to grifting, we'd be in a much better place.
Who are we talking about now? Like, who are we talking about at this point in time? Grifting, huh? Okay, so where exactly in all of this does all of these ridiculous pet projects that were being funded by the U.S. taxpayer, where do they fit in this? It's so funny because both sides point to the other for pretty much the same evils.
Now have a mob family running the United States, but that's bad. But what's worse is Michael Corleone is running the grift and Fredo is running the government. This is a toxic combination of outstanding grift with incompetent governance.
Okay, so I'm really here for his statements about men and boys. I can't actually make any really significant comment on his political opinions at this moment. If you want to enlighten me in the chat, like I'm much more of a macro, like big picture thinker. Like I think that what the real problem is not grifters in government necessarily, but the fact that our economy is drying up. And it's drying up because we've mismanaged the resource that actually creates the economy, which is men. And that's a bold statement, isn't it? Like if we look at our current economy, it is the result of the conceptual innovation of a man in the 1930s. His name was Claude Shannon. And he had this completely new concept of using bits in the current computing machines of the time, and then also using bits to send information back and forth through computers. He basically laid the foundation for modern circuits and also the internet, all of this. And it was just a conceptual, it's not necessarily a technological concept, a technological revolution. It was a conceptual revolution. He took the technology of the day and conceived of rearranging it in another way that enabled everything. And then we've been living in 90 years of prosperity because of his disruptive, novel thinking. And since then, what have we done to our little disruptors? We've destroyed them. We've medicated them. We've ostracized them. We've bullied them institutionally. I'm not just talking about kids on the bullying. Like, institutionally, we've bullied them. We've told them that if they're more like girls, then that makes them real people, right? If they act more like girl students, compliant, wanting to please, obeying rules, then that would make them better people. It's patriarchy getting its evil tendrils into boys and forcing them away, destroying their girl cells and forcing them away from their correct feminine impulses towards being boys. So if we just get in there and get rid of all male mentorship, fatherhood, things that boys like, suddenly they'll be freed to be girls like they want to be. And yet, where does the disruption come from? It doesn't come from the compliance students. It comes from the students that we have medicated and put back and ostracized and turned off schooling. It comes from the little disruptors. And we have not been properly taking care of our little disruptors, and now our economy is in the shitter. And all of this is just when there's an interesting anecdote I heard once, and the less money that you have in your budget, the more arguments you get. So if you can imagine like a small town with a budget committee, and they're dealing with, say, $1 million. Nobody has any argument because everybody can get a piece, right? But when you restrict that down to 100,000, you start to get more and more arguments. You start to get more and more competition over that scarce resource. And once you're down to like 10,000, you basically got blood in the streets, right? That's the principle that we're seeing now. Everybody is at each other's throats because the economy, the tide, is receding. And we're trying to imagine that all of these top-down approaches is going to fix it. It's not. You can't. You cannot legislate grass growing. You can't do that. You just have to create the conditions and encourage it. Don't spray it with Ritalin. Don't stomp on it. Don't scream, like pull it out if it isn't, moss, because moss is the preferred type of ground cover. You just have to create the conditions for it to grow, and that is a bottom up. And again, bringing back this, I'm not completely clued in on the specific types of politics that he's talking about. Maybe you can tell me in the chat, and we can have a conversation about that, but unfortunately, I can't comment specifically on what he's saying here. So let's keep going.
Yeah, I mean, do you have hope that our politics will reject it?
I am hopeful.
Okay, so what I'm hearing here is we got two groups of grifters. Let's just assume he's saying true. We got two groups of grifters. One is not in power, and the other is like, wow, that's morally wrong that we're not able to get our snouts into the trough, into the increasingly small, increasingly restricted trough. Okay, fair enough.
I think America has survived the worst. I do believe a lot of people, good people, will start speaking out. And I think the key is, if you look at, this grift makes Putin blush. This is the biggest grift in history. No one has pulled off this kind of grift this quickly. And the way typically there's been successful pushback on grift, if you look at Navalny, who got a lot of traction against Putin, he made a very simple connection. He said, all of these oligarchs in Russia are getting rich, and there's potholes in Moscow. And Senator Warren's message was the right one when she said, they're getting rich and you're losing your health care.
Does anybody believe this shit anymore? They're going to bat for all of this crap that Doge has been finding. Like, did they ever talk about this? Like, on the left? Did they ever talk about this? Really? Ugh.
So I think when people start connecting the fact that their wealth, their prosperity is going to decline, and they see just how wealthy the people with proximity to the president are getting, I think they will decide to stand up. I'm also hopeful that the Democratic Party will move beyond just the...
Do you ever apply that to your own party? I don't necessarily want to cape for a particular political party, but do you guys ever apply that to your own party? Because I think there was a lot of wealth transfer going on There's a big party, going on in terms of taxpayer money in the last administration. I think this is pretty much a standard thing. I don't think that government really does anything to help the economy. Maybe gets out of the way. Maybe its least offensive thing that it can do is infrastructure projects. But for the most part, I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I believe that the economy should be left alone and it will function best that way. So, but what government does do is people who get into the government, they get to, send money to their pet projects, to their friends, and government contracts, stuff like that. That's generally what happens. And if you really want to change that, honestly, if you really want to help the economy, we need to focus on the bottom up. But if you want to change that, then you sort of have to start getting this. It's something I noticed with the recent Canadian election is that what ended up happening is the guy, Mark Carney, who ended up getting in, just sold an emotion. And the more that we sell these emotions in terms of politics, the more we get fleeced by these politicians who, at the end of the day, like Carney basically ran on the platform of elbows up with Trump, like he's going to be tough on Trump. And when he had that meeting with Trump, it was actually a little disturbing to watch because there were moments where Carney, in the presence of Trump, and Trump was very laudatory, like he showered Carney with praise while he was paying attention to him, and then the rest of it he just turned into sort of a sunshine session for himself. But when Carney was actually talking, there was this kind of giggle in his voice. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but it's like a schoolgirl in the presence of like the captain of the football team, and she's like and it's almost like this overwrought emotional like little burble in the giggle, like they're overcome, so their diaphragm is quivering. It sort of felt that way. It's like this combination of hero worship and sexual desire. And I really felt that Mark Carney was feeling a lot of that in the presence of Trump. And although I don't think that Trump was necessarily reciprocating, he certainly thought that Carney was one of the prettiest girls in the dance. Let me tell you. All right, let's keep going. But that kind of emotional thinking, and people bought Carney because he said he would be tough on Trump, right? And then he was anything but. And they bought that emotion in the moment. And of course they will defend and they'll say, no, he really was trapped. He said Canada wasn't for sale, guys. And then immediately after Trump said, never say never. Tee-hee-hee-hee-hee. Oh, you're so naughty. Later, Mr. Trump. We'll talk later. That after. That kind of thing. And he didn't even push back on Trump saying that the U.S. needs nothing from Canada. The guy was twisted around Trump's pinky finger, but everybody who voted for him bought that feeling in the moment of sticking it to Trump, even though it had nothing. Like the two of them are actually business associates. Like Carney bailed out one of Trump's son-in-laws, right? But they were actually have a relationship that's amicable, and yet they presented this idea. It's almost like that classic con art cardistry. Have you ever watched Road to El Dorado with Miguel and Tulio, and they get accosted by the Spanish police? I don't know, it's probably something else at that time, and then they pretend to get into a fight to get out of it. It's sort of that. It's like pretend to be at odds, to be fighting. You see this all throughout, like for example, Better Call Saul. It's one of his Saul's or Jimmy's big go-tos is that he'll pretend to be fighting with his co-conspirator in the con in order to snow the mark. That's what happened. And it's just going to happen more and more and more the more we think about politics in a very emotional, overwrought way and in very simplistic terms. Like, oh, they're Nazis, they're fascists. Oh, you gotta get elbows up with those fascists. And then we just get manipulated. And then we don't look at this stuff logically. And they just fleece us.
Strongly worded letter And what I'm encouraging them to do is draft legislation that will not pass that says that a country that is operating black sites or co-conspirator in this kind of fraud will be on the hook in 3 years and 9 months. And that if you're an individual cooperating and engaging in this, the statute of limitations on these types of illegal incarceration or fraud are longer than 3 years and 9 months. I think the Democratic Party needs to.
Oh, good Lord. I mean, I can't get in the way of, like, if they think that fraud is happening, yeah, sure, go after it. But fraud is not a partisan issue. And they're making it out to be a partisan issue, which ties exactly into what I'm saying about this black and white emotional thinking. Like, sure, if you think that people in the Trump administration are engaging in fraud 100%, you should go after them. What about the Biden administration? I'm pretty sure there might have been a little bit of that in there too, right? Like, but this is that's not a partisan issue, and you're making it one, and that's part of this over-emotional, like, side taking.
Start being the party, quite frankly, of not effing around as opposed to the one of a strongly worded letter. We need to start thinking like them and behaving a little bit more aggressively.
Oops. Ooh, no. I've screwed up. I have screwed up massively. No, okay, good. It's good. It's good. I'm good. We're good. I think we're about, like, this far in. Nope, a little bit further. Sorry, guys. Oh, no, a little bit back. Okay, so the Democratic Party needs to get more aggressive. Okay. All right. So that's another, like, sort of emotionally laden idea.
I mean, do you have hope that our politics will reject it?
Is running the grift and Fredo is running the government.
Yeah.
I am hopeful. I think America has survived the worst. I do believe a lot of people, good people, will start speaking out. And I think the key is, if you look at, I mean, this grift makes Putin blush. This is the biggest grift in history.
So we've heard this already. I apologize. I lost my place.
Healthcare. So the Democratic Party will move beyond just the strongly worded letter. And what I'm encouraging them to do is draft legislation that will not pass that says that a country that is operating black sites or co-conspirator in this kind of fraud will be on the hook in 3 years and 9 months. And that if you're an individual cooperating and engaging in this, the statute of limitations on these types of illegal incarceration or fraud are longer than 3 years and 9 months. I think the Democratic Party needs to start being the party, quite frankly, of not effing around as opposed to the one of a strongly worded letter. We need to start.
Okay, so again, sorry for repeating that. I just wanted to make sure I got exactly where I needed to be. All right, so again, why are you making this a partisan issue? Fraud in the government is, as far as I know, bipartisan. Why don't you work to resolve that? Or are you constructing a narrative, an emotional narrative around this that you are using to enact a particular political end? Again, that comes back to right what I was talking about, these highly emotional narratives that are leading us to be manipulated by these people who I suspect that all politicians, and I'm afraid I'm going to include Trump in that, all politicians probably like each other more than they like us, including this dude, Scott Galloway, who's going to bat for his side of the con.
Start thinking like them and behaving a little bit more aggressively.
I want to come back to young men. This was
Okay, so I'm going to go to the chat here and see if anybody's got something interesting to say. Yeah, I apologize. Yeah, it sounds like he's on a loop. Oh, hello, Minion Popsicle. And, oh yeah, Richard Beer sends me a message. Allison, don't you know that a Democratic Party gathering that they can feed all of the attendees in the stadiums with 5 loaves and 2 fishes? I think that's a Christian reference. The Great Endure says, there is a website called Open Secrets highlighting the amount of donation money going to D's and the R's. Despite R's reputation for being big business, it was systematically the case that the D's are getting twice the amount of donation money compared to the R's. The top 10 donors are almost exclusively directed towards the D's. Mostly these organizations are big unions. Yeah, I think that's, I mean, I could make a conjecture here. I think that's because the entire left has been shucked. Like, everything in it has been removed. And what we're seeing is this kind of corporate government collusion wearing its skin. And using these terms in order to enforce like a moral supremacy on the people that they govern. That's like the gold key for tyranny, is to feel morally superior to the people that they govern. Something that I've said in the past. And I actually got into it with a LibCorp on I don't want to call them liberals or left or even Democrats. They're basically mouthpieces for this government and corporate collusions. And I got into it with this individual, and it was over the idea of separating church and state. And I said that the fundamental reason why we do that, or we want to do that, is because you do not want a state thinking it has moral authority over the people it governs. I mean, they can have authority, but not moral authority. Do you see the difference? They can't think of themselves as being morally superior to the voter or the taxpayer or the citizen. And once you do, you're in for a world of hurt. And that is the gold standard for authoritarianism, is to develop a sense of moral authority over the people they govern. Then we become slaves. Then we're slaves. So the idea of separating church and state is the idea of ensuring the government does not develop a sense that it is morally superior to the people that they govern. That they should never be considered that way. In fact, they should be considered morally lesser. Politicians should be considered morally lesser than citizens, in my opinion. But regardless, that's what I believe that this separation of church and state really meant. The individual said, no, it's just about Christianity not being in the government. Like, they couldn't extrapolate this idea to a great, like, they couldn't take this one instance where we got church out of state and extrapolate that to a greater principle. No, it just had to work in this one instance. And I think that's sort of similar with this thinking about Nazi Germany. We can't extrapolate the fact that it was a media hysteria that caused a lot of the problem, and say, hey, maybe we should keep our eye on media and not just carte blanche consider them to be above being oversight or being questioned, because they are in a big way responsible for what happened during Nazi Germany. And then they can construct another media hysteria if they aren't kept, if there is no oversight and a certain amount of skepticism to what they do. And again, the left doesn't seem to, it only applies to that one historical instance. It's like, no, there is a greater principle to be drawn from that one historical instance. There's a greater principle to be drawn from separation of church and state. There's a greater principle to be drawn from the horrors of World War II in regards to media excess. Anyway, but it's just, it blows my mind how limited that thinking is.
From your letter endorsing Kamala Harris and urging her election, and you write this specifically about men. The whole subject of what it means to be a man has become radioactive, infected by a dialogue that feels more like disdain, toxic masculinity, for example, than a conversation meant to address the issue. Young men don't know who they're supposed to be and lack the resources to go out into the world and find.
All right, so here we are. We are at the part that relates to men, which is the part that I'm actually interested in, because as I've said many times on Honey Badger or Badger live streams, that the real politics are the politics between men and women. And here it is. Let's listen to it again.
Radioactive, infected by a dialogue.
Okay.
And urging her election, and you write this specifically about men. The whole subject of what it means to be a man has become radioactive, infected by a dialogue that feels more like disdain. Toxic masculinity, for example, than a conversation meant to address the issue. Young men don't know who they're supposed to be.
All right, so I think what he's saying is that the dialogue has been infected with things like toxic masculinity, which, fair enough. And I would point out that we have, like, everybody who talks about masculinity can't identify positive masculinity. That is a positive trait that you associate with men and manhood that you do not associate in the same way as with women. And that is like a unique value proposition for men. And people who talk about toxic masculinity can't identify one. So those individuals regard masculinity by process of elimination as purely toxic. So the only way that men differentiate themselves by women is through toxic behaviors. Not beneficial behaviors, just toxic behaviors. And now the left, or the corporal government conclusion wearing the left skin, has sort of noticed that this alienates a huge part of the voter base. And also a huge part of the taxpayers and the workers. Who knew, like men are actually more than half of those.
And lack the resources to go out into the world and find out.
Okay, so I think that, honestly, men can sort of find their own way if you get out of their way, generally. And really, it's like they say it's a crisis in masculinity, right? I think it's a crisis in treating boys like shit. And maybe if we stop doing that, things would get better. Like if we're medicating boys, if we're treating them like defective girls, they're going to have problems. But that's not because they have inherently problems. That's because we're giving them problems. And so, like, if the grass isn't growing because you're stomping on it, it's not because the grass is flawed. It's because you're stomping on it. Okay.
I know a lot of folks will say this privately, but are still afraid to sort of platform this conversation and really look at the plight of young men as something that has to be, to borrow your word, elegant and thoughtful and not politically toxic. How do you do that?
With data, and I mean, the far right.
Okay, let me listen to that again. I gotta stop reading you guys' chat. You're distracting me.
And not
Oh, I know. I don't. What? I get corporate sponsorship. What do you think, Richard? No. There's no corporate sponsorship here. I don't say anything that is beneficial. Like, I tell people to sit back and just think about things. Nobody wants to hear that. They want to know who the enemy is. They want to go rawr, right? Like, and I also say maybe if boys are not growing properly, stop stomping on them. People really dislike that because that somehow is making boys out to be victims. Well, yeah. Like, but if the reason why the grass isn't growing is because you're stomping on it, and then you're like, well, stop stomping on it, and you're like, oh, but you're making grass out to be a victim. Okay, well, I guess continue to do that. Continue to victimize boys, because if you stop or you recognize it, that's making boys out to be a victim, and so, I don't know, that'll cause the elder gods to emerge from a crack in human society. I don't know. Like, is it that bad? Like, if we recognize that boys can be harmed by something, do we all just freaking implode? Do we turn into like a green blob? The drummer from Spinal Tap, just like, is it just we can go no further? We can go this far and no further. We can only recognize that boys are harmed, and then we all just floop. It's gone. It's like a souffle that falls, that is falling because boys were recognized as being harmed by something.
Politically toxic. How do you do that?
Oh God, what exactly is this woman saying?
Find out. I know a lot of folks will say this privately, but are still afraid to.
Oh, so she's saying that this discussion
A dialogue that feels more like disdain. toxic masculinity, for example, then a conversation meant to address the issue. Young men don't know who they're supposed to be and lack the resources to go out into the world and find out. I know a lot of folks will say this privately, but are still afraid to sort of platform this conversation and really look at the plight of young men.
Do you want to know why? Because feminism. Like literally our society, like the institutional narrative now about men and boys and women is that men and boys oppress women. Men and boys are the problem, right? And they try, the feminists will say, oh, it's not a bio-truth. It's not biological, it's social. But the problem is that you're basically saying that every time boys and men aren't under the oversight of specifically feminists, they're going to go and do horrible things like use grape and domestic violence, grape and beatings to uphold the patriarchy. Like this is the institutional narrative around men and boys. They are the problem, right? And they need to be controlled or they'll instantly start being the problem again. Okay? That's the narrative. It's a narrative of control. It's a very, very controlling narrative. It's also a very demonizing narrative. And it like I was recently speaking to a patron who is a criminology, I think she's credentialed in criminology now, but he's still a student, might be going for his PhD. And he talked about how this idea of gender dynamics was just a wide open field and nobody had really done anything with in sociology. And feminists got in there and they basically just colonized the whole thing based on a premise that was nobody ever said, hey, you sort of got to prove that. And that premise is not just that men oppress women, but also that men use grape and beatings. So they grape and beat their wives and daughters in order to uphold patriarchy. And no one in academia said, hold up, wait, wait, slow down. How do we falsify that? How do you actually make that a statement that we can look at empirically? No scientific rigor was established or applied to this. And it has become the orthodoxy. And within this orthodoxy, men and boys are the problem. And there is no way to fix the problems that the problem has. There just isn't. You know, and they keep trying to fix the problems that men and boys have by framing men and boys as the problem, right? Oh, you're suicidal. Have you considered how you are selfish and don't worry about the plight of women? Have you considered that you're suicidal because you are a femophobe and you refuse to get therapy because it's a woman thing? Have you considered how your toxic masculinity is making you want to kill yourself? Like this is the dialogue. Like how you cannot solve men's problems, men and boys' problem in a paradigm in which they are the problem. And that is the institutional paradigm in which we exist right now. The end. And these individuals are not going to get out of it because their political position or their political fellow travelers, all the people in the happy ship left, whatever it is, they use this narrative that men and boys are the problem in order to get most of their political ends done. Okay, now the conservatives, I don't think they're really in a headspace to understand that we don't have a society unless we can solve the problems of men and boys. Period. We just don't. What we have is something coasting for the cliff. I don't think they're in the headspace to really understand that, but at least they don't literally use presenting men and boys as the problem as a plank in their politics and a reason and a weapon to neutralize their opposition. Okay, let's listen to a bit more.
As something that has to be to borrow your word, elegant and thoughtful and not politically toxic. How do you do that?
Outside of the framework that makes men and boys the problem, right? Outside of the framework that uses that narrative in order to justify its existence, to gain money and clout and implicate and try to destroy other political positions. All right, you're basically like arms dealers asking, well, how do we help victims of shootings, and how do we help victims of shootings in war? Well, just don't do what you're doing. And it's probably not a great analogy. I'm sorry, I come from a very liberal background, so my analogies tend to have that taint. But you know what I mean. Like, if you want to be able to do something, you've got to get out of the narrative that you use. But you're not going to do that, so you're going to continue to do nothing. And the conservatives can continue to also do nothing, but at least they're not doing, like, actively going out and shooting people, shall we say.
With data, and I mean, the far right, to their credit, or the right, recognized the problem before anyone else. But their solution was...
Yes. Well, first of all, you would probably consider me part of the far right or something, right? Yeah, and people in the men's rights movement, which wasn't necessarily on either side, we did recognize this. And then you called us far right because you want to use the narrative that men and boys are a problem in order to enact your political will. Right? You want that. That's the big threat narrative that gets everything done for you. And you called us far right because you don't actually have any principles. You just have a desire for a will to power using this narrative that men and boys are a threat.
To conflate masculinity with coarseness and cruelty, or to try and return to the time of the 50s.
What the... Okay. Am I part of the far right? Am I or am I not? Are men's issues advocates or men's rights activists, are we part of the far right? Are we? Have we ever advocated for coarseness or cruelty? Or just recognizing that men can be victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, false accusations. Men can lose their children, right, in divorce. Okay? Boys are falling behind in schools. Suicide, veterans issues. Like, just recognizing that sometimes we have to treat men as having problems, not being the problem. Right? Am I losing my freaking mind here? And you guys called us far right. And the funny thing is that you are so coarse. They say that people like me and other men's issues advocates are coarse, right? We're coarse. And yet, all this man's solution, and I actually watched or read his BBC interview, his solution was drink more and something about women preferring men who are economically viable. Okay, well, until women choose not to prefer men who are economically viable, men are going to have to be a little bit more coarse in order to, go out and win the bread.
50s, when things were better for men, and that wasn't good.
When were things better for men? This is the other thing. As a men's issues advocate, I sort of question the narrative, the feminist narrative, which he's appealing to. There's a lot of people who think that the feminist narrative is correct because there was a time where things were better for men. When? Like, I guess the 20s were okay, the 10s were sketchy, but the 30s, was that better for men? When families had to throw their sons out because they had to choose to feed their sons or the daughters and they chose their daughters? Was that better for men? When men were starving and unemployed and were living in like vagrant communities, was that better for men? That was a shitty time. The 40s. Well, I guess that was World War I too. Was that better? World War I in the 10s, the 10s. World War II in the 40s. That better for men? Really? I don't think so. I don't think the past was better for men. I think a lot of people or young men for some reason think that feminism is right about this, but not about anything else. Well, it wasn't. I've actually done a lot of look into history, and the past tends to be really shitty. Well, not just shitty for men, but shitty for most everybody. Like, until we got indoor plumbing and heating and regular supplies of food, things tended to be a little bit sketch, you know. But really, it wasn't better in the past. And men's issues advocates would say that. We were shoved into the far right hole, right? And we said this. But the other thing is that your terminology, your threat narrative, your feminist threat narrative explicitly says things were better in the past for men. So now you're saying, oh, well, men think that things were better in the past for them because you told them! This is what you said! These dumbasses are like, oh, yes, things were vastly better for men in the past. Why are young men thinking it was better in the past for them and want to go back?
But either because they were just not nearly as good for women.
Compared to what? For the love of God. Compared to what? Compared to the situation for men? Do you ever do that? None of these people, they don't. Again, this entire framework that these individuals operate under, never been empirically proven, never been framed in a way that could be empirically proven or looked into. It is the exact opposite of science. They just invented a bunch of shit and everybody believed it. And here we are. And they're operating in that framework. The shit framework. Well, okay, congratulations. You have no solutions. All you have is shit. All right.
And then on the far left, quite frankly, the advice is for men is to act more like a woman. And I don't think that's the right advice either. I think a data-driven argument.
Well, thank you. Props for Galloway, Scott Galloway. Men should not act like women. Men should have a right to their own gender identity and approach to life. This is where we are, folks. This is the radical notion. Oh, men shouldn't have to act like women. Well, of course not. I mean, they wouldn't want men to act like women, because how could they serve women?
And
you may think I'm being uncharitable, but I have actually read his prescriptions. They're non-existent. They're basically just do what women want and also drink more. You're feeling depressed, guys. Scott Galloway thinks you should drink more. I'm not kidding on that one. I'm not even joking.
About some of the data we cited earlier, and also just a recognition that empathy is not a zero-sum game. That civil rights didn't hurt white people. Gay marriage didn't hurt heteronormative marriage. We can still recognize the immense challenges women face in the workplace, especially after they decide to have kids.
The immense challenges women face in the workplace. Yes, because the workplace was never intended for someone who wants to prioritize young child care. And actually, you know, it's the workplace was not. The irony is that way back when, okay, there would be sort of a apportioning of childcare between men and women, right? So women would take very young children, and their work was consistent with taking care of fairly young children. And men would generally take the child when they were a bit more older and start teaching the trade and teaching the various activities that were required of children in the jobs for the village, right? This was the breakdown. Women took young children, men took older children. And you see this in hunter-gatherer societies and peasant societies. It's generally what's happening. Now, men in a post-industrial system had to completely let go of that aspect of their parenting. And they did so, and apparently never complained about it. Never once. They had to, their work-life balance went to work. Right? So originally they would be off, playing and working with their kids, teaching them the trade, teaching them various tasks that they needed to learn to become adults, being hands-on with their kids. from, I don't know, from like what, 5 to 12, whatever, right? And they had that was a part of who they were as men. They had to give that up completely. Just be like, yep, giving that to the state. State gets to do that now. Did you think women did that? No, they didn't. Men did. They had to give up that role, that paternal role, to the state in terms of kindergarten, first grade, second grade, all of that. They gave it up. Never have I heard them complain about that. Never have I heard them say, this was a great injustice done to us. We were forced into work, and we had to give up our relationship with our children to do so. And now you give me this crap about, workplace is... the workplace is really hard for women because they haven't done the same thing men did. They haven't given up their time with their children. They want to continue to balance it, right? They don't want to just cut out that kind of maternal involvement with their children. They want to have a workplace that allows them to keep it. Whereas men were just like when the industry said, yeah, guys, you can work or you can take care of your kids. And the men were like, well, guess I'm working. Not women. No, we can't ask that of women. So that's why it's hard for women, is it? It's hard for women because men made the sacrifice. And they were forced to. There was no discussion about it. None. In fact, there was absolutely no discussion about it, right? This is probably one of the first times any of you have heard this framed in this way. We talk about women balancing choices that men never had, or men had to sacrifice. And then we say, oh, it's harder for women because they have to balance these things, when they could just sacrifice them like men. Okay.
But also recognize that a 19-year-old male should not pay the price or be penalized for the extraordinary privilege, the unearned privilege that my generation received. I think.
Do you think that women of your generation didn't also receive that privilege? See, that this is the framework they always operate in. It's always men that receive the privilege. I mean, even if you think about it, is that really privilege to have the entirety of a family's livelihood put on your shoulders, necessitating you sacrificing things like the old way that people would have? There would be small, men tended to be, they would be cobblers, they would be bakers and butchers, and they'd have small businesses. That was all sacrificed during the Industrial Revolution, plus their time with their children. Is that privilege? Is that really fucking privilege? If it is privilege, then why are women complaining about having to make that choice themselves? If it was privilege for men to become the primary bread earners, and yes, that is what happened, guys. Before, the whole family would be working at a family trade, or they would be working the farm, right? After, men had to leave the house and their children to go get a job in the industrial landscape. And I'm not saying that that's we can't go back. That just happened. It's done. But I'm saying that they made that sacrifice, right? And if it is privilege to be the primary breadwinner, then women's problems with work, it should be their privilege to simply say, hey, I guess I'm going to have to just work, and childcare is going to have to be done by somebody else. The end. I'm just not going to... There's no work-life balance here. I'm just going to sacrifice my relationship with my child. Right? They're going to have to do that like men did, if that's privilege. And then they'll be as privileged as men. Right? Yeah, we'll all be privileged. We'll all be working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and our children will be raised by robots. So much privilege. But that's essentially what he's saying. He's saying that men of his generation were privileged. Well, yes, so were the women. Specifically, boomers were privileged by an incredible economic environment. That's statistically true. But that also included the women, who existed in a time where everything was freeing up for women, but they could also choose to stay at home and live off of one wage. Astounding, huh? Okay.
I think there are a lot of programs. I think people are recognizing. The dialogue has just gotten so much more productive, Nicole. 5 years ago when I brought this up, I was immediately called a misogynist because there was quite frankly, an understandable gag reflex because the majority of people talk.
12 years ago, 5 years ago when you brought this up, I was immediately called a misogynist. I don't think so. You are putting on men a privilege of an entire generation. And you're just saying, well, we shouldn't put it on the generation that it wasn't given to. Oh, thank you. Maybe you shouldn't be putting it on boys at all. And the other thing is, let's look at the negative space here. Because he's saying we shouldn't put the privilege of baby boomers on the current Zoomer generation, doesn't that also still sort of suggest that the Zoomer boys are privileged over the Zoomer girls? So it's still a narrative of privilege. You're just saying, well, it's ridiculous to apply the privilege of boomers to boomer men to Zoomer men. We'll just apply the privilege of the Zoomer generation to Zoomer men. So they aren't actually challenging the essential men are the problem narrative.
Nicole, 5 years ago when I brought this up, I was immediately called a misogynist. Because there was quite frankly, an understandable gag reflex because the majority of people talking about, quote unquote, advocating for men, it was just thinly veiled misogyny.
No. Here's the problem. You think it's misogyny to exit the framework that men and boys are the problem. And the reason why you think it's misogyny is because the only thing that is allowed, that we are allowed to recognize differentiates men and boys, is toxic things. Because if we recognize positive things, we're being misogynist by excluding women from them. Because it's misogyny to exclude women from things. Okay.
The way the dialogue has become more productive is the people who have embraced this movement are, simply put, mothers. And I hear from them every day, and the dialogue is something like this. I have 3 kids, 2 daughters, 1 son. One daughter is at Penn, the other is in PR in Chicago, and my son is in the basement vaping and playing video games.
Well, are you ready to hear why? Are you really ready to hear why? Because for several generations, your sons have been treated as the problem. Okay? So everything they were was treated as defective boys as a result of initiatives in the 90s. Okay? And then when they get out of school after having been treated like defective girls for 18 years, they go into a landscape in which they are going to be treated like sexual predators without any kind of due process, any real due process if they're accused of anything. Their interests are going to be sidelined in favor, for example, if they're athletic, their athletic interests are going to be sidelined if women don't have equal interest in the things that they have. And then there's going to be women-only scholarships, bursaries, women-only tutoring and community opportunities. Women and girls are going to be welcomed in open arms in colleges. And they are going to try, the college administration is going to try to do everything they can to help them, okay? And make their life a good, including if they find a male in the environment to be whatever, for whatever reason they don't like him, okay, that guy's going to be got rid of. And through basically a kangaroo process. I had one example of this, which is insane, is a woman, a college student, got a man expelled, a college student who was a man, expelled for sexual abuse or like a grape. And in her own statement, she said, he was unconscious, drunk, unconscious. I took his pants off and got on him. But now I regret, and I think he raped me. raped me. He was kicked out. I shit you not. This has happened. This is the situation. Now that's an extreme version, but there are a lot of these stories from college campuses. College campuses treat men like problems. They treat them like sexual predators. At the same time as they don't give the same protections if they are sexually preyed on as they do women, and they treat them like they're not welcome. College campuses treat women like they're very much welcome. And there's all kinds of, like I said, scholarships, bursaries, etc., to help women out in the college lifestyle, right? So at every step, and again, I with the K to 12, I haven't even gone through the active discrimination against boys in terms of their grades, that they are graded less for equal work. I haven't gotten into that. I haven't gotten into Ritalin and Adderall and the effects on men and boys. Like, Ritalin and Adderall stunts boys' growth to the tune of 1 inch. Adderall is, we're discovering that it has an association with psychosis. We've been literally poisoning boys in schools and then making them feel very much unwelcome in colleges. And then when they get to work, preferential hiring, DEI hiring for women. And it is specifically women. Let's face it, it's white women who have benefited most from diversity hiring, amazingly. Amazingly. So this is why. Are we going to address these factors? Or are we going to continue to just put it back on men and boys?
Mothers see what's going on here. And a lot of feminists now recognize that the country and women aren't going to continue to flourish as long as men are flailing. You know what? You know who?
But feminists are the ones who see men and boys as the problem. And in fact, if you think about it, let's just look at feminist rhetoric. Feminist academia. You know, I have the receipts for this. I can show you all of the studies in the literature reviews about how feminist academia looks at issues like sexual assault and domestic violence, so rape and beating, and is trying to use those to prove that men use rape and beating of their wives, daughters and sisters and mothers and female friends. They use rape and beating in order to uphold patriarchy, right? Let's just go back. Now, hold that in your mind. Feminists assert that men and boys throughout all of human history, and they can't even get out of it with like the agricultural tribes in Europe prior to the steppe nomads coming through, because they were violent too. So all of human history, men have done this to women. They've done it. It's not it's not biological. It's just what men do when women don't have oversight over them, right? They don't have control. They don't have them under their thumb. This is what feminists believe about men and boys. Okay? All right? In that context, how can you want anything but for men and boys to be as small and removed and peripheral and in the basement vaping and playing games as possible? Right? Because you are saying that men and boys are literally at war with women and girls, that they use violence to enact an age-old war against women and girls. Right? You have to, at some point, if you want to help men and boys, you have to step out of that narrative, because the logical consequence of that narrative is that we just need to destroy men and boys more. You're just going to take all of the emotional impetus to solving the problems of men and boys, and you're going to fritter it. You're going to destroy it in the context of that narrative. They can never get momentum up because you're helping the problem, which is just making more problem. You're helping the most despicable creature on the planet, which is a human male. What has he done with his time on planet Earth? Well, he's waged war against the human female. He has used rape and beatings to keep the human female in line. In that context, believing that about men, how can you pursue anything positive for men with any kind of real passion or real compassion or real emotional investment in a positive outcome for men? You tell me. Okay. I'm getting really feisty today.
Who wants more economically and emotionally viable men? Women. 1 in 3 men under the age of 30 is in a relationship, 2 in 3 women. Why? Because women are dating older because they want more economically and emotionally viable men. How many times have you heard people say, I know all these wonderful women, economically viable, high character, attractive, and they can't find a mate? No, they can find men. They just don't want to find any men they want to date.
Boy, you have a lot of contempt on your face, dude. Okay, so what we have is the problem is that after all of this, after this narrative of condemning men and saying that they're horrible people who need to be kneecapped and removed from everything, or as much, or alternatively, just, let's kneecap them so women can get equality with them, and we'll constantly move the goalpost on equality. Men are now no longer economically viable, and this is a problem because women don't want them. You did all of this work to get rid of what makes men attractive to women, and now you're finding that men aren't attractive to women. But these are women of character. Maybe a woman of character would recognize the situation for men in this day and moderate her expectations of his economic viability. No, that's putting it on women.
Our men are failing, and it is really having an impact on our society.
Yes! Because you wanted this, and you got it! And how is this men and boys' fault? The most that they did was bring it about. They were like, we gotta kneecap women, or we gotta kneecap men and boys. We gotta kneecap them in K-12. We gotta kneecap them in college. We gotta kneecap them for jobs. All right, you did all of that. Now all the men are kneecapped. Oh, why aren't the women finding these paralyzed men attractive? Jeez. Well, because that's... How can the people who did this be part of the solution? They won't even recognize that they did it. Do you think, where do you think this came from? 80s, 70s, 80s, we're like, oh, we need to make it so that women achieve more. And it's obviously privilege if men are achieving more. It's unfair. We got to get rid of those unfair advantages benefiting men. So let's change everything. Let's change the curriculum. Let's change the scholarships, the bursaries. Let's change everything to make it more difficult for men. Oh, men are failing. I wonder, where did that happen? How did that happen? Huh? What? This is, where did that come from? Ugh.
And quite frankly, it helps a populist and a nationalist spread a very ugly message.
I'm guessing that in terms of ugly messages, the message that men and boys use rape and domestic violence or even don't even just want to construct a society for their own benefit at the expense of women, that doesn't even register, because that's the narrative that justified all of this, guys. That's the narrative that justified all the female-only scholarships, all the changes in curriculum in K-12 that actually, they don't really favor women, but they handicap them less than men or boys. So, in the phonics system, a girl won't read as well as she would in the whole word system, but she'll read better than a boy, and that's what matters. So they're actually handicapping girls, but because it handicaps boys more, they go for it, right? All of this stuff, okay?
And capture the attention of them
is a problem, which was all happens in the context of the narrative that they created. And again, it was the wide open field, right? Sociology wasn't doing anything with gender dynamics, so feminism went into this wide open field, set up camp, said a whole bunch of crap that nobody called them to the mat for, You know, the first feminist pipes up and says, I think that men use rape and beatings to uphold patriarchy. And all the sociologists didn't say, wait, are you going to prove that? Are you going to prove that? Are you even going to frame it in a way that can be proved? I think men construct society for their own benefit at the expense of women. Are you going to say that in a way that can be proven? No. No scientific rigor applied. They're allowed to say whatever the hell they want. We just agree with it. We've done a whole bunch of shit based on this unfalsifiable belief system that they've constructed out of thin air. And at the end of it, the real problem is that the men and boys that you've utterly fucked for generations might get a bit pissed. You utterly fucked based on what is now looking like a functional lie might get a bit pissed. I can't go to bat for you people. Your priorities are despicable.
And the people who are worried about them and start basically spewing hate, and they become receptive.
Is that hate? I think that this entire thing that you've done, that you've constructed, and it has been you, it's been you on the left, the progressive so-called, you have constructed an entire narrative, a demonizing narrative. I honestly think that feminists watched wartime propaganda directed it at enemy nations, and they said, we can do that, and we can direct it at men. And then we'll just invent some shit why this is true. That whole narrative, then all the policy built on that narrative. And now a generation of boys who are failing because of this bad policy built on something unfalsifiable that feminists made up way back when and were never called in the mat for. And you're worried that they're going to you're more concerned about maintaining your narrative than you are men and boys. Let's put it right out there. And that's the hateful thing to say, is it? What about you? Why don't these people ever get called to the mat for their hatred? Why is it that this narrative is just allowed to skate? Like, think about it, guys. Men and boys use rape and beatings to uphold society. Is there anything more hateful to say about any group of people than that? And yet they have said it for generations now, and nobody's called them out on it, and now we are reaping the whirlwind of this bullshit, and they're concerned that the people their narrative has targeted might get a bit upset. I'm not even a target, and I'm fucking upset.
Receptive to blaming women for their romantic problems. They become receptive to blaming immigrants for their economic problems.
Dude, we just went through all of this. We kneecapped men and boys because we believed, based on no actual evidence, that they were privileged over women and girls. And now women and girls don't want them. Who is it that doesn't want them? Women and girls. Who is it who's not looking at the situation and saying, hey, we got generations of actually disenfranchising boys leading to pretty bad outcomes for them economically. Maybe I should evolve what I want from a man. I've actually talked to a woman a while back about that. She was really stressed by her husband losing a job, and he wanted to start his own business, but it hadn't gone off the ground yet. And I explained to her, this is the situation we live in now. You're just going to have to accept that you're going to take a larger role in producing for your house and making sure your household has an income, right? He's not going to be that perfect provider. You know, they're still married. But that's what I said. You got to move past that idea. Why don't women have to do that? Now that we've enjoyed the fruits of this several generation long experiment in not ever questioning feminism and just going with whatever they say. Now that we've done that, why isn't it on women to evolve their thinking?
Because quite frankly, this group has been ignored. It's time to level them up and realize empathy is not a zero-sum game.
Oh yeah, I remember the zero-sum game. Empathy is not a zero-sum game, guys. And this side constantly brings this up. Empathy is not a zero-sum game. It's a negative-sum game for them. If men get something, it's taken from women. It's not that men and women are fighting over $100. It's that if men get $50, that's stolen from women.
Stat I'll give you go into a morgue with 5 people who died by suicide, 4 men.
Again, they're saying this within the framework that men are the problem. How do you recognize that men have problems? I mean, you can spout off, oh yeah, most of the suicides are men. But how do you recognize that? What's your solution? Very light on solutions so far.
If any group was killing themselves at 4 times the rate, I would argue we would move in with special programs and more empathy. And we don't do it because of the unearned privilege that I garnered.
What the? Yeah, your generation, the men were also killing themselves at 3 to 4 times the rate. And your generation of men are probably still doing... What the... He just won't let go of that. You see what I'm talking about? He just will not let go of that narrative. That men are the problem. I mean, maybe he has a little bit of compassion for younger men, but he still perpetuates the narrative that's causing the freaking problem for them.
And young men are paying that price.
And young men are paying that price. You guys assumed that they were privileged based on the insane mutterings of a bunch of people that were never held accountable for anything that they said in terms of scientific rigor. We have discovered, now that we've put the feminist framework to the test, let's call it that way. We have the feminist framework. Men and boys are unfairly advantaged over women. Right? We've had a couple generations of directly opposing that so-called unfair disadvantage, giving the reins to feminists to reconstruct K through 12 in whatever way they think is female focused. Reconstruct college to remove all of the biases against women, to encourage businesses and government to hire based on whether or not the applicant is a woman. We've had 2 generations of feminists doing this, enacting their theory, or their conjecture that men were privileged over women. And what do we have now? Men and boys who are failing. Can we never actually asked ourselves, is feminist conjecture correct? Can we go back to the drawing board, and now that we have practiced feminist conjecture for several generations, can we perhaps consider that the feminists were wrong and men and boys were not privileged? No. Right here. We can't. You just said it. We can't. We can't do that. So how are we supposed to fix the problem if the problem is created by the framework, this belief that men and boys are privileged? The answer is we can't. We just continue to do the same stupid things. And this is the real big problem. When I say that the politics comes down to the grassroots, like bottom up, this is it. These individuals are destroying the grass. They're destroying our economy by continuing to perpetuate the same bullshit and not allowing it to be wrong, that men and boys are privileged. Right here. Unfortunately, this is the opposition.
Do you see any Democratic politicians doing the right things?
Oh boy, this is going to be fun. Oh, God, we got one in the chat. MIDI doctors. Males are often privileged in innumerable ways. Name one. Name one. Go ahead. I wear sunglasses because I get migraines.
Oh, sure. I think there's a
On
general
this issue
recognition that
specifically,
something.
though, around men, around young men.
Our jobs
Oh, good Lord.
are like a calling.
Just a second, another ad. Sorry, guys. Come on. Oh, this is a long one. Good grief. Get off my screen, ad. Oh, it's... sorry. You know what? I'm just going to keep talking until these ads stop. All right, so she's saying that Democratic politicians are doing something. Yeah, because they just lost an election, and it's likely they lost an election because their rhetoric is absolutely toxic when it comes to young men. Here we go.
Yeah, there's governors who are approaching it from an economic standpoint and implementing more vocational programming. 2/3 of our kids aren't going to get college degrees.
Okay, vocational programming. You know what the problem is in the context of this narrative that men are privileged over women and girls? It's what happened in Birmingham, UK, right? You remember we did a show on a while ago, all the trash and rats in Birmingham, the UK? And it's because they decided to pay men less. It was as a result of a payment equality between women who were doing caring and cooking. So because those women were paid less, they won a lawsuit. And they had to have a whole bunch of payout because they were paid less than the men who were picking up garbage. And they could no longer pay the men who were picking up garbage. And they couldn't pay them a wage that would attract them to doing that work. So now Birmingham is awash in rats and garbage. And it's just because trash work is dirty, dangerous. It is not, doesn't give you any social cachet. It doesn't even give you any real gratitude, like caring and cooking. Okay? It's not really as social. It's just not fun. So you have to pay people more to do that work. And women don't want to do it. They won't do the work even if you pay them more. And because women don't want to do it and they don't do the work even if you pay them more, suddenly trash collecting is under the gun as being a result of male privilege. The existence of trash collecting is under the gun as being a result of male privilege. And you can say, oh, let's get boys into vocational. One is, are these vocations going to make them attractive to women? Are women going to consider them economically viable when they're in them? Two, are these vocations going to end up being put in these gun sites because there are more men in them? And they're obviously a result of male privilege. Therefore, we have to go to war against all of the jobs that men are more likely to do because it pays more, and for whatever reason, men regard them as less unpleasant. Probably because they have a higher tolerance for discomfort and risk. Vocational programs, guys. This is how we solve this problem. Vocational programs. Which we probably used to have, but were all shut down because of Title IX or because girls didn't like them.
And we all knew that guy in high school. He was not going to go to college, but he knew how to fix a car. What happened to wood, auto, and metal shop? And even just saying that triggered some people 5 years ago. To even have a conversation that maybe men and women were different and more.
You're welcome. Because it wasn't you moving the Overton window, friend.
Prone to different skills. Governor Wes Moore said that the number one priority for his administration was going to be focusing on the plight of young men and boys. We need to have a very honest conversation around the fact we have the most single-parent households. And let me be clear.
Good for him that he's going to focus on the plight of young boys. And hopefully there has been a real change. I guess we can thank Trump winning for that. Huh? Do you think any of these people would be talking about this at all if that hadn't happened?
I was raised by a single immigrant mother who lived and died as secretary a lot of my life. But the single point of failure.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. He was very grateful for his mother for having an abortion at 47 as a single woman so he could go to school and not have to support her and the child. I believe that's what it meant. That was my reading of it.
If you were to reverse engineer to when a boy comes off the tracks and descends into trouble, it's when he loses a male role model. And we have more single family homes than any country in the world.
Are you willing to accept a real solution to that? Which is you got to stop the person who has the greatest power over whether or not a boy has his father in his life is the mother. Are you going to address that? Right? You're going to address who is doing this. The answer is no, because she says you cannot blame women.
What's interesting is that girls have similar outcomes in single-parent homes in terms of college attendance and income and rates of self-harm. But the moment a boy loses a male role model, he comes off the tracks. What it ends up, the research shows, is that while being physically stronger, boys are emotionally and mentally much weaker.
What? I'm sorry, this is bullshit. Are you fucking kidding me? We expect men and boys to swallow so much. I mean, like that one example that I gave, that men had to give up their relationship and that between them and their children in the early childhood. They never even complained about it. It just was. And yet we still hear work-life balance from women. Where is he getting this idea that men are emotionally weaker?
And we need to recognize that and move in with programs. We need more men in K through 12, maybe redshirt boys.
Are you going to deal with the issue of false accusations that's pushing them out?
Boys who are just biologically.
I mean, you can say you want all these things, but are you going to do the work? I mean, you can't solve any of these problems without being able to blame women, or at least feminism, for the things that it's done.
Much less mature. The prefrontal cortex is on average 18.
Okay, so far, we've had don't blame women and boys are weak. That's why they're not doing as well. We're certainly okay with appealing to boys being more immature than girls and being emotionally weaker than girls for their outcomes. But God forbid you blame feminists or women.
Months behind girls, more vocational programming, expanding freshman classes at universities. I think we need national service.
How are you going to get men into universities? Like they're a big. I'm pretty sure at this point in time, a lot of the reason why men aren't in universities is because the atmosphere is toxic. Are you going to solve that? I mean, basically, this has been just a list of things he wants to see happen with no solutions except for vocational training. And don't blame women, don't blame feminism, but sure, let's blame boys for being weak and immature. Emotionally weak and immature. This is a lovely start, huh, guys?
Service, Nicole, to get people from different sexual orientations, income levels, ethnicities working together in the agency of our country such that they feel more American as opposed to identifying through a specific demographic.
Do young men really have that problem that they identify as young men more than American? That sounds really bloody weird.
A tax policy that stops transferring money from young people to old. Do you realize?
What, you're going to get rid of pensions? I don't think you're going to get rid of pensions, friend. Also, what does this have to do with the crisis in boys? What is the thing that boys are identifying with that they should be identifying with nationally? You mean like they're identifying with being male? Like why can't boys identify with being male? And really, is it boys that have this issue with identifying more with a feature of their biology or just of identitarianism? Is there a really big problem with identitarianism with straight boys? This is baffling. Like, this doesn't even make sense to me. Maybe I'm just too dumb.
Plus, every year we transfer $1.3 trillion to the wealthiest generation in history, American seniors. And as a result, for the first time in our nation's history, a 30-year-old isn't doing as well as his or her parents.
His or her parents. Boy crisis. You see how it always sort of like ends up just like everything that he talks about. The only thing that he has recognized is boys being emotionally weak and immature relative to girls. So they're failing because they suck. Guys, have you tried sucking less?
Creates rage and shame. So what do we have? We have the most obese, depressed, and anxious generation in history. And Nicole, do you have kids?
I do. I have a son and a daughter.
Well, you know this. Anyone who has kids knows the following. You have your world of work. You have your world of friends. You have your world of kids. Something comes off the tracks with one of your kids, and your whole world shrinks to that kid. I mean,
okay.
Let's think about this. What is this all for? We talk about AI, we talk about politics, we talk about special interest groups. If our kids are failing, if our kids are depressed,
you're boys. Like, just say it. You're boys. Why does he have such an allergy to...
if they're self-harming at the greatest rates in history, then we've lost the whole shooting match. So I think a series of...
Yeah.
I think a series of programs are needed, and we're starting to finally see it.
No. Oh. Are we really, though? Are we really going... do we really have the will to step out of the framework that has never been proven true, never even been subject to the least amount of scientific rigor? We just decided to randomly believe that boys and men construct a society to oppress women. And now that we've played out the policy as a result of that men and boys are unfairly privileged, we've found that no, they're failing, they're killing themselves, they're unaliving themselves, there's all kinds of problems, and our economy is in the shitter, right? Can we now question the premise that the premise that we never questioned before we did this? No, of course not. That must stay sacrosanct. So men and boys, we need to fix their problems, but we can't question the narrative that they are the problem. And maybe that might be causing their problems. No, can't do that. All right. I'll see what you guys have to say. I'll see if you've sent any super chows. If you want to send me a message, feedthebadger.com/justthetip, please. And I will read them out. Go in there now. No, we have nothing. Guys, what the hell? Feedthebadger.com/justthetip. Somebody send something through. Didn't even get any super chows either. I guess this isn't a topic you're very much interested in. Interesting. Okay, well, I'll look in the chat and see if that individual actually responded. Okay, so this was MIDI doctors. I'm just going back. The guys don't want to do the female jobs too. No, that's not the case. First of all, there's a significant amount of prejudice against men in female jobs. For example, nursing. But also, they will do those jobs if they pay more, right? And it's not that they don't want to, like, it's not that they don't want to pay. It's that, okay, let's imagine you have trash collecting. And trash collecting appeals mostly to men, but not to women. Women don't want to do it because it's not, it's not something that, it provides social cachet, or it's uncomfortable, it's risky, okay? They don't want to do it. So you have twice as many job applicants to the things that women want to do, because men also will do cooking and caring, okay? You're going to have to give men, or the people who are interested in picking up trash, more money because you have fewer job applicants. Simple as. For whatever reason, men are willing to do these jobs, but women aren't. That means you have a bigger pool of applicants for the jobs that women are willing to do, because often men are also willing to do them. Men are more willing to do women's jobs than the jobs that women consider more men's jobs. Let's put it that way. Okay, let's look at this. I'm trying to figure out, because he said, or she said, that men are also privileged. Okay. All of this isn't the result of gender ideology by anyone. Okay. All right. So is it not the result, like, is what you believe is men's privilege, is that not the result of supposedly men's gender ideology? The problem is economic equality for working class people is getting worse, but you get involved in this gender culture war crap. But you're already involved. You're already saying that men are privileged. Okay? And yes, it's not economic equality that's getting worse. It's the fact that our economy is no longer productive in the way it was. Our buying power is reduced because instead of an economy, instead of the movement of goods, instead of people going out and getting the new hotness, we got a government that's inflating everything. That's why your buying power is in the shitter. All right, let's see. Is that it? You didn't actually give me a analysis of men's privilege? Loads of men go to universities. There isn't a problem. Actually, there's a significant decline in men going to universities. All right. You're making your own argument. Man, this went really quick. Males get more positive reinforcement for solving problems at school than females. No, they don't. Men and boys do not get more positive reinforcement. I mean, if you gave me a link, maybe I could look at it. Males are often privileged in innumerable ways, including getting more parental attention than their female sibling sisters within hours of birth. Yeah, I'm going to have to look at that science. I would go through it if you could give me a link. Or just give me a name. I'll go through it. Because I have a serious skepticism. Because boys tend to, parents of boys tend to do things like have their son cry it out. They tend to be more responsive to distress in their girls. Not to mention, maybe the boys are getting more attention because they've had unnecessary genital surgery in the form of circumcision. That's another thing we could talk about. All right. Take another look for the super chows. Nope. Gosh, you guys are quiet. Is it just because it's just me? Meta Wolf says we're first in line to get drafted in the first wall that comes along. Yes. Yep. You're most likely going to be expected to sacrifice for this society that's pursued these ridiculous ideas based on a narrative that you get most out of society. I mean, whenever I delve into this, it just fills my brain with so much fuck. Okay, let's, all right. Check once more. I don't know, did anyone of you send something through and it's just sort of stuck in the tubes? I can take a look and see if I can. You can hear my furious typing. I'll just double check here. At feedthebadger.com. Actually, why don't you tell me if you like this? Do you appreciate this content? Actually, I don't even think I can log in. I can only use the Discord, which means we might be a bit behind. Apologies if anyone sent something through and it hasn't come through yet. Okay. All right. Do you like this content? This type? Do you like me doing this by my own lonesome? And tell me in the comments below. And again, feedthebadger.com/justthetip if you want to send us a message at any time after the show is over. Very much appreciate that, and we'll address it at the next show. And I wonder if you guys, what you think about this. because I don't always talk about these kind of things in this way. I don't necessarily have room to do it, and I don't usually get into as much politics as I did. And also, ironically, rather than this man figuring out how to convince young men to start going back to the Democratic Party, because originally that was their young men were almost a lock for the Democratic Party. This is reversed in the last 5 years, right? Rather than this individual, Scott Galloway, telling the Democrats how to get young men back, it seems like everybody can thank Trump for Democrats actually talking about the problems of young men, even though they'll never give up their narrative of male privilege, because it's too useful. It's too useful as a weapon for them. Right? It's just too useful. And how are you going to solve men and boys problems in a framework in which men and boys are the problem? Okay, so if you want to support the show, feedthebadger.com/support. Hit the bell for subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, put a comment. Tell me if you like this content, because it's a bit different. I did it all myself. So hopefully it aside from the beginning, I don't think there was too many technical difficulties. So there you go. And thank you for your kind attention, and have a lovely evening, afternoon, second brunch, whatever you're doing, wherever you're doing. See ya.